The stars above the city of Zephyra burned brighter than any lamp, and yet for the people below, their hearts were darker than space itself. The towers were made of crystal and gold, and every level was cleaner than a human dream. In the highest tower of all lived the richest alien on the planet, Arvel of the Threxian Syndicate. Known for her fortune, her cold beauty, and her power to buy and sell entire moons. She had everything except one thing, a healthy child. Her daughter Lyra was born weak, her body failing to move the way it should, her wings small and folded. To the Threxians, weakness was a curse, and so Arvel hid her child from the world, showing her only to doctors and servants who dared not speak her name. Down below, in the lowest part of the same tower, a human janitor named Daniel scrubbed floors no one noticed. He worked silently, his mop and bucket his only tools. Humans were new to this world, seen as laborers, cheap and quiet. Daniel had come here because he needed money to send back to his family on Earth. Every day he moved through halls that shimmered like frozen rainbows, wiping away the dust of lives that would never see him. But Daniel had a habit that made him different. He hummed when he worked, soft, calm tunes that reminded him of sunsets on his home world. He did not hum to please anyone. He did it because it kept him human in a place that forgot what kindness sounded like. One night the tower was quiet. The guards had left for a shift change. The air smelled faintly of ozone and polish, and the stars outside looked like broken diamonds. Daniel pushed his cleaning cart through a corridor he had never been allowed into before. The scanner glitched and the door slid open. Inside was a room glowing in silver light. He froze. In the middle of it sat a young alien girl in a hover chair, her large violet eyes fixed on him. Tubes ran from her arms to machines that beeped softly. She looked fragile, scared, lonely. Daniel lowered his mop slowly and smiled. He had seen that same look before, back home in the eyes of his sick niece when she thought she was forgotten. So he spoke softly. "Hey there, little one. Didn't mean to scare you. I'm just cleaning." Lyra blinked but said nothing. Her species had telepathic speech, but she was too weak to use it often. Daniel began humming again as he worked, his song filling the quiet room with warmth. Lyra tilted her head, the corners of her lips twitching upward for the first time in months. Her hand reached out and brushed his sleeve. The sensors around her flickered in surprise as her heart rate steadied. Daniel knelt beside her chair and whispered, "That's better. Music helps, doesn't it?" She nodded once, shy but curious. He told her about rain on Earth, about kids jumping in puddles, about how sound could make sadness lighter. He didn't care if she understood every word. He just wanted her to feel safe. Hidden behind a screen of invisible glass, Arvel watched the entire scene. She had been monitoring the medical feed and saw an alert when her daughter's heart rate changed. The security cameras showed a human janitor standing in her private chamber. Her first reaction was rage. How dare a lowborn human step into her child's room, touch her, speak to her? She summoned guards and stormed into the chamber herself, the floor vibrating with every step of her jeweled boots. The doors flew open and she appeared, tall and radiant, her armor gleaming like molten metal. Daniel turned and looked at her with quiet surprise. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He simply stood there, holding his mop like a soldier holds a flag. "What is the meaning of this?" Arvel's voice thundered. "Who allowed this creature to approach my daughter?" Her guards aimed their weapons, the air humming with power. Daniel did not move. Lyra flinched and tried to speak, but her voice broke into soft gasps. Arvel's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but her pride returned like ice. She pointed at Daniel. "Speak, human. Why are you here?" Daniel glanced at the little girl, then back at the furious mother. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I was cleaning." Then she looked lonely. "I started humming." She smiled. "I guess that's all." Arvel's jaw tightened. "You dared to interact with my bloodline?" She snapped. Daniel's gaze did not drop. "I wasn't speaking to her," he said quietly. "I was listening." The room fell silent. Even the machines paused between beeps. Lyra made a small sound, a laugh weak but real. It was the first time she had laughed since the day she learned she might never walk again. For a moment, Arvel could not breathe. She turned her head toward her daughter, eyes wide. The child's face glowed with life she thought was gone forever. Something cracked in Arvel's heart. Something she had buried beneath layers of pride and fear. She waved her guards away. "Leave us," she ordered. The room emptied. Only the three of them remained. Daniel stood awkwardly, unsure if he was about to be thanked or executed. Arvel looked at him for a long time before she spoke. "You will not enter this room again," she said in a voice that trembled slightly. "You will finish your cleaning and leave." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding more from her eyes than her words. He picked up his mop, gave Lyra a small smile, and whispered, "I'll be nearby." Then he walked out, leaving behind the faint sound of his fading tune. Arvel turned to her daughter. "Why did you laugh?" she asked softly. Lyra's voice was fragile but clear. "Because he listened, Mother." Arvel sat beside her, and for the first time in many years she took her daughter's small hand in her own. She did not know it yet, but that simple human act would begin the first crack in the wall that separated her world from compassion. Outside the window, the stars looked a little closer, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen. The challenge morning arrived on Zephyra with light that shimmered like liquid glass through the tower's wide crystal walls. Every surface glowed, and the smell of ozone and rich minerals filled the air. Arvel sat by her daughter's bedside, her eyes fixed on the tiny movements of Lyra's frail fingers. The little girl slept peacefully for the first time in months, her breathing steady and soft. Arvel had not slept all night. The human's words echoed in her mind. "I wasn't speaking. I was listening." No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had dared. He had not used fear, flattery, or greed. He had spoken with something she barely remembered existed: care. Outside the room, servants whispered nervously. The news of the human janitor's intrusion had spread. In alien circles of high command, it was an outrage. Humans were a labor species, hired for low work, never to approach the upper levels. Yet Lyra's condition had changed after that encounter. Her vital readings improved. Her eyes were brighter. The chief medic, a gray-scaled Threxian named Dr. Kor, entered quietly and spoke in a low voice. "Lady Arvel, the readings are clear. Your daughter's stress levels have fallen by 40% since last night. Whatever that human did, it triggered something we have failed to achieve with all our machines." Arvel frowned. "You suggest we let a janitor treat my child?" she asked sharply. Kor's crest twitched nervously. "I suggest we observe." The girl responded to emotional resonance. Perhaps the human's tone or presence created a neural bridge. It may not be about species, but... He hesitated before finishing the word. "Connection." Arvel dismissed him with a wave, but his words stayed. Connection. It sounded like a weakness to her kind, but to a mother, it sounded like hope. Hours passed before Lyra woke again. When she did, the first thing she said was, "Where is the one who listens?" Her mother felt something twist inside her. "He is gone," she said softly. "You must rest." Lyra shook her head, small tears forming. "I will not eat until he comes back." Arvel's pride fought against her heart. She could command armies, but not her own child's spirit. In the end, she ordered a guard to find the human and bring him up again, under supervision. Daniel arrived later that afternoon, led by 2 armored guards. His uniform was wrinkled and his hands smelled faintly of cleaning solvent. Yet when he saw Lyra, his tired face broke into a gentle smile.
"Hey, little one."
"You still giving them trouble?" he asked softly. Lyra's eyes sparkled, and for a moment the guards themselves forgot their orders. Arvel stood nearby, her expression unreadable. "You will not touch her," she warned coldly. "You will speak nothing more. This is for observation." Daniel nodded respectfully. "Understood," he said, then turned his attention back to Lyra. He reached into his cleaning pouch and took out a few small scraps of wire and plastic, broken bits he had collected from old machines. "I made something for you," he said. "Helps the hands stay busy." He twisted the pieces together, forming a small figure, a bird with crooked wings. Lyra gasped softly as he placed it on the edge of her hover chair. "You made this?" she whispered. "From junk," he said with a grin. "Humans are good at turning junk into hope." Lyra tried to move her fingers. They trembled but managed to push the little bird upright. Her muscles strained, but she did it. Arvel's breath caught. For months, no therapy had achieved this. The alien doctors began recording the event in silence. Daniel only said, "That's it. Slow and steady. Doesn't matter how small the step is, just that you take it." Every day after that, Arvel allowed Daniel to visit under guard. She told herself it was for research. But each time she stood behind the observation wall, her heart softened a little more. Daniel talked to Lyra about Earth, about rivers, about clouds that looked like ships. He never promised her miracles. He only promised time, patience, and laughter, and it worked. Lyra began speaking more, her telepathic voice growing clearer. She began to smile when Daniel entered and cry when he left. In the higher chambers of the Threxian Council, this news spread like wildfire. The council was made of old aliens with scales of gold and silver, who valued strength above all. They called an emergency meeting. "Arvel's behavior threatens our hierarchy," one of them hissed. "If humans can inspire recovery through emotion, our control weakens." Another said, "Her daughter's case must be taken from her care. The human must be removed." They voted in secret and sent an order. The human was to be expelled from Zephyra immediately. That evening, Arvel received the decree in a glowing message cube. Her eyes burned as she read it. It was a direct command from her own council. Removing Daniel would destroy Lyra's progress, but refusing would destroy her career and reputation. Pride warred with fear. She looked at her sleeping daughter and remembered her laughter. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled for the first time in her life. "Summon the council," she said. "I will not let them decide without hearing me." The next day, in the grand chamber of the syndicate, Arvel stood before the council, her daughter's data projected behind her. Daniel was brought in, still wearing his janitor's uniform, flanked by guards. The council leader sneered. "You are a human laborer, are you not?" Daniel nodded. "Then you have no right to stand before us. You defied protocol, entered a restricted area, and polluted a child of Threxian blood." Daniel took a breath, then spoke with calm courage. "If kindness is pollution, then your air is already poisoned. You think strength means silence, but maybe you are just afraid to feel." Gasps filled the room. Even Arvel's eyes widened. The council leader struck the floor with his staff. "Remove him!" he shouted. But Lyra's voice suddenly rang out through the chamber, projected through a telepathic amplifier. "No, he listens. He helps me. He is my friend," the crowd murmured. Never before had a Threxian child spoken in a council hall. Arvel felt her heart break and rebuild in the same moment. For the first time, she did not silence her daughter. She turned to the council and said quietly, "Maybe the human is right." The council erupted in fury. "You defy us?" they thundered. "You risk everything for a janitor?" Arvel's voice rose like steel. "I risk everything for my child." Silence followed, heavy and final. The decree remained, but her defiance echoed through every layer of Zephyra's society. Among the workers, both alien and human, whispers began to spread. The janitor who spoke truth to power. The child who smiled again. The mother who challenged her own kind. A spark of rebellion born not of weapons, but of compassion. When Daniel left the chamber that day, escorted by guards, he saw hundreds of lower workers watching from balconies. Some nodded quietly, some smiled, and one whispered, "Human." Not as an insult, but as a sign of respect. Daniel only hoped Lyra would keep smiling. He did not know that this was just the beginning of something much greater, a storm of change that would sweep through the stars. Revolt of kindness. The sky above Zephyra burned red with the light of distant engines as new ships descended on the glittering city towers. Inside those towers, fear began to move like a silent wave among the high-born Threxians, who had never before been questioned by anyone beneath them. Arvel's defiance had shocked the council, and her daughter's words had spread through every communication network faster than any order they could give. The council tried to silence the news, but workers whispered it through hallways and markets. They told stories of the human janitor who had faced the council without fear and spoken truth to power. To the lower castes of aliens and the small community of human laborers, Daniel became something more than a worker. He became a reminder that even the smallest voice could be heard in the halls of the mighty Arvel, sat alone in her private chamber, her hands shaking as she rewatched the council hearing. Every word of Daniel's voice echoed inside her. His calm, his courage, his refusal to bow even when surrounded by those who could end his life. He had faced them with only truth and a heart that did not know how to kneel. For the first time, she wondered if strength was not about domination at all, but about the courage to care when the world told you not to. Her daughter Lyra rested nearby, her tiny fingers holding the small metal bird Daniel had made. Each time she looked at it, her breathing steadied. Each time she touched it, her muscles grew stronger. Arvel knew that the Council's order to remove Daniel was final, but she also knew that removing him would mean losing her daughter again. Outside the tower, Daniel walked through the industrial streets with a quiet heart. He had been dismissed from the tower officially that morning. His access code had been revoked, his name erased from the employee network. Yet as he moved through the lower districts, workers looked at him differently. Some offered him food, others nodded with silent respect. A few human workers saluted him jokingly and said, "You made them listen." Daniel smiled softly and said, "No." Her smile did. He spent his night at a repair dock, thinking of the child who had laughed again after years of silence. He did not dream of heroism or glory. He only wished he could have helped a little longer. The Threxian Council gathered again the next day. Their anger was sharp. "Arvel has corrupted our order," one elder hissed. "Her daughter's condition is a curse, and now her rebellion has become an infection. This human must be made an example." They sent secret orders to expel all human laborers from upper zones. Many were fired or threatened. Yet the effect was not what they expected. The aliens who worked beside humans saw the injustice and began to help them in quiet ways. An engineer gave a human worker food rations. A medic patched a wound without charge. A trader refused to overprice supplies for the Earthborn. One by one, small acts began to bloom across the city like hidden flowers in winter. Inside Arvel's estate, Lyra refused to eat again. Her telepathic voice echoed in her mother's mind with sorrow. "You promised he would come back." Arvel knelt beside her. "I tried, little star, but they forbade it." Lyra looked at her with tears glowing in her violet eyes. "Then they are wrong." That simple sentence struck Arvel harder than any council decree. She realized that her daughter had learned from the human what she herself had forgotten: to question, to hope, to fight. Arvel took her daughter's hand and whispered, "Then maybe we must show them how wrong they are." That night, in secret, Arvel contacted Daniel. Her message was short and trembling. "Meet me at the lower skyport. There is something you must see." Daniel hesitated, but something in his heart told him to go. When he arrived, she stood without her armor, dressed in plain clothing, her regal glow dimmed by exhaustion. Beside her was Lyra, smiling weakly from her hover chair. Arvel looked at him and said, "I do not understand your ways, human, but my daughter does. She believes in you and I believe in her." Daniel bowed slightly. "I'm not a healer, my lady. I'm just a man who listens." Arvel nodded. "Then listen to this. The council has declared you a danger. They will come for you at dawn." Before Daniel could reply, an alarm rang through the night. The skyport lights turned crimson. A broadcast echoed through every loudspeaker in the city. A cold, commanding voice spoke, the rival magnate Vraxer, a silver-scaled Threxian with ambitions as sharp as knives. "People of Zephyra, your council has failed you. A human dares to poison our young and defy our laws. To prove our purity, I will claim the child of Arvel as evidence and destroy the infection of humanity before it spreads." The words struck like thunder. Daniel turned to Arvel, eyes wide. "He's coming for her." Arvel's expression hardened. "Then he will find we are not as weak as he thinks." Guards poured into the skyport, confusion breaking through their ranks. Arvel ordered her personal fleet to prepare, but Vraxer's private soldiers were already on the move. They struck fast, using EMP burst to disable defense drones. Daniel grabbed Lyra's chair and pushed her toward the cargo bay while alarm screamed through the air. "This way," he shouted. Arvel followed, firing her plasma pistol at incoming soldiers. The air shimmered with light and smoke. Daniel smashed open a maintenance hatch and led them into a service tunnel. His knowledge of the tower's underlevels saved them. Every route he had once cleaned, every vent he had once polished became their escape path. They reached the loading docks where an old cargo shuttle stood half-functional. Daniel jumped into the cockpit and began flicking switches. "I used to clean these things," he said, "but I think I can make it fly." The engines coughed and came alive. Arvel looked at him with disbelief. "You are out of your mind." Daniel grinned faintly. "Humans usually are when we care." The shuttle rose shakily into the night sky, escaping just as Vraxer's troops stormed the docks. Arvel watched the ground shrink below them and realized that this janitor had done what her entire security team could not: save her child when they landed in the shadow of the northern wastelands. The stars were silent again. Lyra was asleep, her breathing steady. Arvel sat beside Daniel by the flickering light of the shuttle's control screen. She spoke quietly. "You risked everything for a child not your own." "Why?" Daniel looked out at the stars. "Because," she smiled. "That's reason enough." Arvel studied him for a long moment. "My people will not understand you." He smiled slightly. "Then let's give them something to think about." Far above them, in the floating palaces of Zephyra, rumors began to swirl. Some said the human had escaped. Others said he had kidnapped the heiress. The council ordered a bounty on his head, the highest in the system. Every hunter across the galaxy received the transmission, and one of them answered first, a name that made even Arvel's blood run cold. It was her own sister, Captain Ryla, the best tracker the Syndicate had ever trained. As dawn broke over the wastelands, a shadow crossed the sand. A sleek gunship descended slowly, its engines whispering like death. Inside, Ryla smiled coldly as she loaded her weapon. "Blood before weakness," she murmured. "Forgive me, sister." And far below, unaware of the storm above, Daniel watched the sunrise with quiet awe, unaware that the galaxy's deadliest hunter was already on his trail, broken myths and bold plans. The wastelands stretched far beyond sight, silver sand glinting beneath two pale suns that rose slow and heavy across the horizon. The air was sharp, dry, and full of static that made the old shuttle crackle whenever the wind blew across its hull. Inside the shelter of that damaged craft, Daniel sat by the control console, his fingers blackened with grease as he worked to repair the comm systems. His every movement was quiet and precise, guided by memory from the days when he had scrubbed and mended broken machines in the lower decks of Zephyra Tower. Behind him, Arvel stood in silence watching her daughter sleep, her mind torn between fear and pride. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless yet also strangely free. She was no longer the richest being in the system, no longer a figure of command. She was simply a mother trying to keep her child alive. When Lyra woke, the first thing she saw was Daniel bent over a glowing screen, humming softly to himself. The sound made her smile before she could stop it. He turned, saw her eyes open, and said softly, "Morning, little one. How's our pilot today?" Lyra laughed weakly. "I can't fly," she whispered. "Not yet," Daniel replied. "You just wait." Arvel listened, her sharp gaze softening against her will. For all her wealth and knowledge, this human janitor had done what no doctor or priest could do. He had given her daughter hope. Before long, the repaired comm crackled to life, but instead of silence, it carried a message that chilled all of them. A deep mechanical voice announced across the frequencies that Arvel and the human fugitive had been declared enemies of the Syndicate. A bounty large enough to buy a moon had been placed on their heads. Every hunter, every mercenary, and every thief in the galaxy was now looking for them. Daniel turned down the volume slowly. "So now we're famous," he said with a small sigh. Arvel's face was hard, her crest shimmering with anger. "They will come for us from every direction. My sister will lead them." Daniel looked at her and asked, "Would she kill you?" Arvel did not answer. She only said, "She believes she must." For several days they hid among the dunes, moving from one wreck to another, living on ration packs and filtered water. At night, Daniel looked up at the stars and thought about Earth. He wondered if anyone back home would ever believe that a janitor could be hunted by alien assassins. He did not see himself as a hero. He just could not watch a child suffer. That was the only rule he lived by. Lyra spent her days learning to move again, each hour stronger than the last. Sometimes she laughed so hard that even Arvel smiled. It was a fragile peace, but it felt real. Then came the night when everything changed. A thunderous roar tore through the air as a fleet of Syndicate drones appeared in the distance, their lights cutting through the dunes like cold fire. Arvel stared at the radar and whispered, "They have found us." Daniel's hands flew across the controls. "We can't outrun them, but maybe we can outthink them." He powered down the shuttle's main systems and rerouted the energy into the sand extractors. The ground beneath them began to churn, kicking up a dense storm of dust. "They can't hit what they can't see," he said as the visibility dropped to 0. Arvel looked at him in disbelief. "You're using sand as a weapon?" Daniel grinned. "Where I come from, dirt solves a lot of problems." The drones fired blindly into the storm, their sensors confused. Daniel guided the shuttle under the cover of the swirling dust toward an abandoned mining tunnel he had spotted earlier. They slipped inside just before the storm began to fade. The tunnel stretched deep beneath the surface, carved long ago by machines that searched for energy crystals. The walls glowed faintly with blue light, casting long shadows across their path. Lyra shivered but said nothing. Daniel parked the shuttle and climbed out to inspect the passage. "We can stay here for a while," he said. "The rocks will block most scans." Inside that strange quiet cave, Arvel finally spoke after hours of silence. "You could have left us and saved yourself. Why didn't you?" Daniel leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because I couldn't. I saw a little girl who just wanted someone to listen. That's not something you walk away from." Arvel studied him for a long moment. "You humans," she said quietly. "You have no wings, no scales, no telepathy, yet you make the galaxy bend in ways no power can predict." Daniel shrugged. "We don't bend it. We just keep trying until something gives." The days in the mine passed slowly. Daniel used the downtime to teach Lyra small exercises to help her coordination. He built toys from scrap, little wheels, pulleys, and blocks. She practiced picking them up, turning them, and placing them down. Arvel watched and began to help. At first her movements were clumsy, unused to such simple work, but soon she grew gentle, her alien hands learning patience from the human beside her. It was a strange partnership, born of danger and love. But their peace was short-lived. One morning a faint vibration rippled through the ground. Arvel froze. "That is no storm," she said. The sound grew louder until the wall shook. Daniel grabbed his scanner and cursed under his breath. "It's a gunship. Just one, but heavy. That's her, isn't it?" Arvel's face went pale. "Yes, my sister Ryla." The gunship descended outside the tunnel entrance, its lights cutting through the dark like burning eyes. Arvel's communicator crackled, and her sister's voice filled the chamber, calm but merciless. "Sister, you have one chance. Give me the human and surrender the child for protection. The council will forgive your mistake." Arvel's hand trembled as she reached for the mic, but Daniel stopped her. "Let me talk." She stared at him in disbelief, but he spoke before she could protest. "Captain Ryla, this is Daniel. Your sister and your niece are safe. You don't have to do this." Ryla's voice came back like a blade. "You think your human words can sway me? You are a contagion. You infect our blood with weakness." Daniel replied calmly, "If caring for your own family is weakness, maybe your strength isn't worth keeping." For a moment there was only static. Then the gunship fired. The blast shook the tunnel, collapsing part of the entrance. Dust and debris rained down. Daniel pulled Lyra close as Arvel shielded them both with her body. "She's sealing us in," Daniel shouted. "We'll suffocate if we stay here." They scrambled deeper into the tunnels. The walls narrowed, forcing them to crawl. Arvel's armor scraped against stone, sparks lighting the dark. Lyra clung to Daniel's neck as he led them forward through twisting passages. Behind them, the gunship's weapons tore open more of the cave. When they reached a wide chamber, Daniel saw something glowing on the far wall. A cluster of old mining drones still powered by dormant cells. "We can use these," he said. He connected his tool to one of them, rewiring the circuits. The drone came to life, hovering with a low hum. "We'll make our own storm," he whispered. He linked the drones together, and soon the entire chamber buzzed with energy. As Ryla's soldiers entered the tunnels, the drones exploded in a blinding flash. The shockwave threw them back, collapsing more rock behind them. Daniel, Arvel, and Lyra ran through a secondary shaft that opened into the desert beyond. When they finally emerged into the open air, the gunship was smoking, its engines crippled. Arvel looked at Daniel with a mix of awe and disbelief. "You turned mining drones into bombs," she said quietly. He smiled wearily. "A clean floor starts with a few broken stains." For the first time, Arvel laughed, not the cold, polished laugh of a noble, but a real laugh full of exhaustion and relief. As they stood beneath the burning suns, she realized the galaxy had already changed. A human janitor had fought her world's best hunter and lived. The myth of Threxian superiority was cracking, piece by piece. She looked at Daniel and said, "They will keep coming." He nodded. "Then we keep moving." Above them, far in orbit, the syndicate channels were already buzzing. The footage of the battle had leaked, showing a human defying a warship and surviving. On 1,000 worlds, people watched and whispered a single phrase: "Humans are not weak." And somewhere deep in her mind, Arvel began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, that truth could save not only her daughter but an entire galaxy that had forgotten what strength really meant: deeper bonds and a hard choice. The twin suns sank behind the jagged cliffs of the wasteland as Daniel sat beside the fading campfire and checked the readings on his small medical scanner. The numbers worried him. His vision swam every few minutes. His pulse was unsteady and his skin burned with fever from the lingering venom that still lived inside his veins. It had never killed him, but it was changing him. Each bite, each exposure, pushed his body further toward some strange balance between pain and survival. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked over at Lyra, who was drawing lines in the sand with a stick, her movements steadier than ever before. She giggled when a breeze scattered her marks and then turned to Daniel and said proudly that she could feel her legs again, not strong yet but alive. Arvel watched her daughter from a distance and felt a storm in her heart, one made of fear, love, and gratitude that she could not name. They had escaped Ryla's attack for now, but Arvel knew it would not last. The Syndicate never forgave betrayal, and the bounty had already drawn the eyes of smugglers, bounty hunters, and opportunists across half the galaxy. Every transmission from orbit carried whispers of the human who could survive poison, and the child who smiled because of him. What had started as a scandal was becoming a story, and stories were far harder to kill than people. Arvel stared at Daniel and finally asked the question that had haunted her since the day they met. "Why do you keep risking yourself for us? You owe us nothing. You could vanish into the outer systems and no one would ever find you." Daniel looked at her with tired eyes and said, "Because someone has to stand where kindness should be. Maybe it's a fool's job, but I can't stop now." Later that night, Lyra's breathing became uneven. Her condition had worsened again after the long run through the desert. Arvel's composure broke as she knelt beside her daughter, her voice trembling as she begged the machines to give better readings. Daniel pressed a hand to Lyra's arm, feeling the faint pulse beneath her skin. The venom inside him reacted again, his veins glowing faintly blue under the light of the fire. Arvel saw it and stepped back in alarm. "Your blood," she whispered, "it's changing." Daniel winced as pain tore through his body. "Maybe it's the only reason I'm still alive," he said through gritted teeth. "Maybe your venom isn't killing me, it's teaching me." Lyra's weak voice cut through the panic. "It wants balance." "You told me once that pain teaches balance." Arvel realized what she had to do, though it terrified her. "The venom stabilizes you," she said quietly. "If you can endure a full dose, your body might finish adapting. You could live, but if I miscalculate, you will die in seconds." Daniel's lips curved in a faint smile. "Guess that's what we call a 50-50 chance." He turned to her and said softly, "If it works, I can save her too. Whatever's changing in me might fix the nerve collapse in her body." Arvel's eyes shone with tears that refused to fall. "You are insane, human," Daniel nodded. "That's what gets things done." She prepared the dose herself. Her long fingers trembled as she drew the glowing liquid into a slender injector, each drop humming with deadly energy. Lyra tried to stop her, her small voice pleading that Daniel had already done enough, but he only smiled and said, "If you ever want to walk again, you'll have to promise me something. Promise you'll keep helping others walk too." She nodded through her tears. Then he held out his arm, his veins already lit like blue rivers under his skin. "Do it fast," he said. Arvel took a breath, pressed the injector to his neck, and released the venom. The effect was instant. Daniel convulsed, his back arching as light burst beneath his skin like fire trapped in glass. His heartbeat roared in his ears, his vision exploded with color, and he could hear the wind itself whispering. Arvel screamed for him to hold on while Lyra clutched his hand and whispered, "You can do it." Minutes felt like hours until at last he fell still, the firelight reflecting off the sweat on his brow. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he exhaled slowly and opened his eyes. They glowed faintly silver, but his voice was steady. "I'm not dead. Guess we got the dose right." Arvel pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, unable to speak. She had never seen anyone survive such a thing. Lyra smiled through tears and whispered, "You're glowing, Daniel." He laughed weakly. "Yeah, feels like my blood's got its own flashlight." The glow faded slowly, leaving him pale but alive. When he stood, his steps were sure, his movements calm, his body lighter than before. He looked at his hands and whispered, "I think I understand your venom now. It's not meant for killing. It's meant for change." They spent the next day preparing a new plan. Daniel's survival had given them an unexpected advantage. His body could now resist nearly any toxin or pathogen, making him the perfect key to break into the Syndicate's medical core where Lyra's genetic records were held. If they could reach it, they could expose the experiments and the lies that had created her condition. Arvel knew the risk was enormous. The core was guarded by fleets and surrounded by defense towers. But Daniel's stubborn courage infected her like a fever. "You taught me something, human," she said as they studied the maps. "Strength isn't silence. It's the voice that refuses to stop speaking." Daniel nodded. "Then let's make some noise." Before they could move, they received a signal from an approaching ship. Arvel's eyes widened as she recognized the code. It belonged to her wounded sister Ryla. The gunship was limping toward them, smoke trailing from its engines. Daniel tensed, ready for a fight, but Arvel raised a hand. "Wait, the signal carries no weapons code. She's coming alone." When Ryla stepped out of the ship, her armor was scorched and one wing hung broken. She looked at them with a tired half-smile. "You were right," she said quietly. "The Council betrayed me too. They sent another hunter to erase the evidence. I want to make it right." Daniel did not trust her, but Lyra's eyes filled with joy at the sight of her aunt. "You came back." Ryla knelt beside her, touching her niece's hand gently. "For too long, we called kindness a weakness. I was wrong. I saw what you did, human. You fought for her without weapons, without power. You made me remember what family means." Arvel embraced her sister, and for a brief moment, the two warriors who had once been enemies were only siblings again. That night, as the new allies planned their strike, the wasteland wind howled through the cliffs carrying the promise of war and change. Daniel outlined their steps on a piece of broken hull metal, sketching routes and time windows. Arvel watched him and said softly, "If we fail, there will be no second chance." Daniel smiled, his eyes steady. "Then we don't fail. That's a human rule too." Lyra watched them both with quiet pride, her legs twitching with new strength. She whispered to herself that she would walk when the stars rose again. None of them knew what the next day would bring. But for the first time since the galaxy began calling humans weak, three fugitives stood together. A mother who had found courage, a child who had found hope, and a janitor who had become a symbol of the strength that lived in every act of compassion. The tower heist and the human edge, the night before the mission, the wasteland was silent except for the hum of the wind brushing over the jagged cliffs. The stars hung like frozen sparks, and the wrecked shuttle they used for shelter flickered with dim blue light from its dying batteries. Daniel sat with a sheet of metal across his knees, carving out the final plan with the human edge and the dawn of change. The world of Zephyra was burning with tension as the Syndicate Tower loomed high in the city's center, its glass walls shining like knives under the stormy sky. Inside that tower, the truth waited to be set free. Arvel, once its ruler, now stood against everything she had built. Beside her walked Daniel, no longer a janitor, but the living proof that humanity's strength came not from weapons or wealth, but from will. Behind them, Ryla and a small crew of loyalists prepared the diversion that would keep the guards away from the control hub. In the heart of the storm, they would make their final stand to expose the Syndicate's crimes and save every child trapped by its greed. The plan was dangerous and impossible by every logical standard. The tower's shields were powered by an energy core buried 3 levels below the main broadcast hall. To reach it, Daniel had to crawl through maintenance shafts filled with pressurized coolant gas that could freeze flesh in seconds. Arvel had to infiltrate the council chamber and draw attention away while Ryla held off incoming reinforcements. Lyra remained in the shuttle above the city, linked to the system by a portable console. Her task was to trigger the galaxy-wide broadcast once Daniel connected the evidence core. Every part of the plan relied on timing, courage, and faith, 3 things Daniel carried more naturally than any soldier. The first phase began in silence. Daniel entered the shaft, the narrow walls glowing faint blue from the coolant lines. Each breath fogged the air, and his muscles screamed as he crawled deeper into the freezing dark. His mind replayed every moment that had brought him here. The first time he had seen Lyra smile, the first time Arvel had dropped her mask of pride, the countless nights of fear turned into laughter. The memory kept him warm when the cold bit into his skin. Above him in the main chamber, Arvel walked into the council hall wearing her ceremonial armor. The guards bowed out of habit before realizing she was not supposed to be there. Her voice cut through the confusion. "Summon the council," she commanded. "I have evidence that will decide our future." The council chamber filled with high-born Threxians whose scales shimmered like molten coins. They shouted questions and threats, but Arvel stood unmoved. "You built an empire on Suffering, she declared. You sold children, you poisoned bloodlines, you silenced compassion. No more. The council leader rose, his eyes burning. You are no longer of this house, Arvel. You bring shame upon your kind. She met his gaze without fear. Then I will bear that shame proudly. As she spoke, Ryla and her fighters stormed the outer decks, clashing with waves of armored guards. Explosions shook the structure. The sound of battle covered the hum of Daniel's progress through the core tunnel. Daniel reached the final barrier, a chamber lined with bright conduits that pulsed with power. The console in the center held the locked records of every experiment, every act of cruelty, every truth they had hidden. He placed his hand on the access port and felt the sting of energy as the system rejected him. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and pressed his other hand to his neck where the faint mark of venom still glowed. The hybrid energy inside him flared, bridging the circuit. The machine screamed in protest but opened. Data began to pour through his veins like liquid fire. The connection burned, and for a moment he felt his heart stop, but he forced himself to stay conscious. Above, the lights across the tower flickered as the systems overloaded. Arvel turned toward the council's great screen as the feed changed. Images began to play in front of every Threxian in the room. Images of children in cages, of laboratories filled with screams, of deals signed with the blood of innocents. The council shouted in horror and rage, but their words were drowned out by the sound of the broadcast spreading beyond the tower. Across the entire planet, across the galaxy, every channel filled with the truth. The Syndicate's crimes were no longer secrets. They were the shame of a civilization laid bare before the stars, but the victory came with a cost. The overload triggered an emergency purge in the tower's core. A deep alarm filled the halls. Daniel's voice came through the communicator, strained but steady. The system's going to blow. You have to get out. Arvel shouted back, not without you. He smiled even though she could not see it. You gave them truth. That's enough, go. Then the line went silent. Arvel ran through the corridors as the tower began to tremble. Flames licked up the walls and smoke filled the air. She reached the lower chamber just in time to see Daniel collapse beside the console, his body lit with silver light from the power still running through him. She knelt beside him, shaking him desperately. You can't leave now, she cried. You saved us all. His lips moved weakly. No, you did. I just cleaned up the mess. The core exploded, throwing them both backward. When the light faded, half the tower had been destroyed. Rescue ships circled above the ruins, and the entire world watched as the once untouchable Syndicate fell. Arvel awoke in a medical bay hours later, surrounded by surviving members of her crew. Her first words were a question. Where is he? No one answered. Then Lyra entered the room, her steps slow but steady, walking on her own legs for the first time. She carried a small data crystal in her hand and said softly, He sent this before the explosion. Arvel took it and activated the projection. Daniel's face appeared, tired but smiling. If you're watching this, I guess the tower's gone. Don't be sad. Everything we did mattered. You taught me that even out here among stars and power and pride, being human still means something. Take care of her, Arvel, and don't let them forget what one small act of kindness can do. Tears fell freely down Arvel's face, something she had once thought impossible. Lyra took her hand and whispered, He's still out there. I can feel him. And somehow Arvel believed her. Weeks passed and the galaxy began to change. The broadcast had shattered the old order. The Syndicate's leaders were overthrown. The oppressed species of the colonies rose to rebuild their worlds together. Humans, once dismissed as weak laborers, became symbols of resilience. On many planets, statues were raised not of warriors or kings, but of a simple man holding a mop like a banner. Arvel used her remaining wealth to build sanctuaries and schools where every child, human or alien, could learn side by side. Lyra became the voice of the new alliance, reminding all who listened that kindness was the strongest force in any universe. One evening, months later, Arvel and Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the new city, rising from the ruins of the old tower. The air was filled with the sound of construction drones and laughter. Lyra smiled as she looked up at the stars. Do you think he'd like this place? She asked. Arvel smiled sadly. He'd probably complain about the dust and then start cleaning. They both laughed softly. A sudden flash crossed the sky, not a meteor but a small ship descending through the clouds. Its beacon signal was old and faint but unmistakable. Arvel froze, her breath catching in her throat. Lyra whispered, "It's him." When the craft landed on the platform below, a figure stepped out slowly, limping but alive, his eyes still glowing faintly silver. The workers nearby stopped in awe as Daniel looked around, blinking in surprise at the new city that had risen where corruption once stood. Lyra ran to him, her small legs carrying her faster than ever before. He caught her in his arms, laughing through tears. Arvel approached behind her, her voice trembling. "You were supposed to be dead." Daniel smiled. "I was. But humans are bad at staying that way." That night they sat together under the twin moons, 3 lives bound by a bond stronger than any law. Around them, the city lights shimmered like stars fallen to Earth. The galaxy had learned something it would never forget. That true strength is not born from wealth or blood, but from the courage to care when no one else will. And so the janitor, the alien mother, and the child who once could not walk watched the dawn break over a world remade by kindness, proof that humanity's greatest weapon had never been its technology or armies. It was its heart.